Hello artists, and welcome to another art tutorial with Mr. White. Today we're exploring the basic techniques in tempera paint. We're going to need a paint palette with some paints and some empty buckets for mixing space, a variety of brushes including a couple of round, a square or two, and a fan brush, a pencil and some paper, either a separate sheet or a page in your journal, a paper towel, and 2 cups of water. For this, we're going to lay out 9 approximately even-sized boxes, either on the top 2/3 of a page in your journal or on a whole separate sheet of paper. Doesn't really matter. We're going to make 9 boxes, and these will be labeled flat wash, underpainting, gradient, color blend, wet on wet, fine line, dots, pointillism, pressure test, and finally sgraffito. Now, one of the most important things with any painting is the angle that we are holding our brush at to give us more control over the speed and the sort of edges or limits of our paint. With this, you can see here a diagram that helps to illustrate this. When we hold the brush at a shallow angle, we have a large amount of the bristles touching the paper. So with this, we paint quickly, but it's hard to control the tip of the brush and the edges of our painting area. This is great for filling a large area quickly. The middle angle gives us a little bit less of the bristle touching and a little bit more control over the tip of the bristle. So the middle is a good medium between fast painting and fairly controlled painting. You can press a little more firmly to have a larger portion of the bristle touching, which gives you a little bit more variety. Next is a steep angle where the brush is close to being held vertically, and this is especially effective to give us control over the bristle. So if we're trying to draw fine lines or paint the edge of things, we typically hold at a steeper angle. It doesn't paint very fast, so we'll often fill areas at a shallow angle after lining or doing the edges with a steeper angle. And finally, holding a brush straight upright or vertical is one that we don't use very often. It's most effective for things like making dots or stippling. So we'll use that probably only once or twice. Now, another important thing about using tempera paint is color mixing. So with this, notice I've got some yellow paint in a couple of cups. I'm going to use one of those to make some green. So I took a small amount of blue on my brush. I left half of it outside of the little mixing cup to draw on it a little bit, and then I took that tiny bit that's left on my brush and mixed it into the yellow. Notice we're using a small amount of the stronger color mixed into the weaker color. This helps us to blend more effectively and without having a lot of waste. Having that extra blue up there lets me pull a little bit in when my first color isn't quite dark enough. Now the first effect we're going to try to do is to make a flat wash. With this, we want to cover the whole box in a smooth finish that is not see-through. We want the paint to be totally opaque or not see-through. I'm doing this by painting in multiple layers with brush strokes that go in single directions and that overlap one another. Then I paint in a second layer using a different direction, and again with brush strokes that overlap, trying to press lightly at the end and trying to get rid of any of the brush marks and just leave a flat surface. For our now, it's always important with tempera paint when we switch colors to wash our brush and to dry it with some paper towel. And for our next effect, I'm going to use what we call an underpainting wash. So I drew some of the empty or some of the clean water from my second water cup, and I'm going to mix some paint in that. And I mix a purple, so I added a little bit of blue above that. I washed my brush, and then I got a bunch of red on my brush. I put it into the cup that had a few drops of water already added, and then I mix up a nice purple. Underpainting is a great way to first lay out a painting, and also it helps to add some more depth to the colors that we use while making it easier to complete the early stages of our work. So underpainting is watering down our paint, laying things out, and letting us paint over them Usually this works best if the underpainting color is similar to the colors that the final object will be. For our next effect, we're going to make a gradient, combining a couple of the ideas we've already used and a little bit more. With this, we're going to paint some clean water on our page or on the box we're going to fill. And I started in just the left-hand 2/3. I'm going to add a little bit more clean water to the other side in just a moment. Notice I'm going to use a complete undiluted paint, and I'm going to paint a line on one edge of the box as rich and full as I can. And then, holding my brush at a shallow angle so a large part of the bristles are touching, I'm going to use back and forth motions, trying to have a smooth transition. With a gradient, as we know, the effect should be pure color or value on one end, fading smoothly to nothing on the opposite end. So here I am pulling a little bit of that paint back and forth and then blending across my marks. Notice this is a back and forth sort of effect, and you can see I wash my brush as needed and add a little bit of clean water too. As we move on, our next box is going to be a 2-color blend. So we're going to use 2 different colors, hopefully fairly similar colors, or colors that will look good blended together. I'm using red and yellow, so I'm painting red in one corner of the box, and then yellow in the opposite corner of the box. And I'm just going to fill much of that space with those before I wash my brush out and use a little bit of clean water to help the blend. As with our other exercises, with color blending, we're really trying to have a smooth transition from one color to the other, having rich, pure color on one corner and the other color on the opposite corner without a line between them. So take the time you need to blend these so you have a smooth finish. Our next box, we're going to use clean water and paint it on the page. Try to dampen it, not have big puddles in there, but we want the whole box that we're working in to be nice and moist. And this is wet paint on top of wet paper, and it gives us some interesting effects. So try a couple of different brushes in a couple of different colors here, and consider trying some of the underpainting wash that you used before, as well as some undiluted paint. And what we see is softer edges. Sometimes the colors will bloom into one another. Even when we have a clean line with a sharp edge on it, wet paper beneath can make the edges get sort of fuzzy. This is very useful in a lot of circumstances and extremely annoying in some. So keep in mind what happens when you're painting on top of wet paper so that you can use that effect without accidents. Moving on to box number 6, we're going to use the tip of our brushes, trying a couple of different ones, a medium and a small. I recommend starting with a square brush, loading paint on just one side of that, and then with the paint facing up, not touching the paper, hold the brush at a steep angle and touch just the tips of the bristles to the paper, trying to use clean, smooth, sharp lines to draw a shape. Draw a few different lines, try to experiment and notice what happens as the paint runs out on a brush. Once you're done, wash that brush, get a second brush with another color of paper. In this case, I pick a very small round brush with a fine point, still holding at a fairly steep angle that lets me have control over the tip. And I draw a smaller version of the same shape within the first shape. This box, our goal is to build control over the tip of the bristle and the lines that we can make. Moving forward, we're going to use stippling or dots or pointillism. We're going to pick 3 different colors, and we're going to make at least 50 dots per color in this box, all pretty rapidly. The goal here should be that each of the 3 colors shows up on its own, and there are spots where they all blend together, giving us a really interesting variety. This is a useful effect for maybe things like foliage on trees or bushes, things that are organic and chaotic, but we need to fill fairly quickly. And of course, make sure to clean your brush in between your next couple of boxes. As we move forward, we're going to do some pressure testing. So this is all about experimenting with a few different brushes and seeing the different marks they can make when we press them very gently, and then a little harder and a little more firmly until we're really squashing the brush against the paper. Notice the different shapes that your brushes make. I started with a square brush and then moved to a fine, small-sized round brush. Try at least 3 different brushes on here to notice a few different effects. The different dots, the different lines, and different shapes that we can create. And as we move forward, we're going to finish one more effect here, and this is called sgraffito. Sgraffito comes from the Italian word for scratching, and we're going to paint 2 layers. We want to start with a lighter layer on the bottom, wash our brush carefully, dry it with paper towels, and then put a darker color on top of it. Once we have that darker layer on top, we're going to use a stylus stick or the back of a paintbrush, and we're going to scratch some lines into it. I'm just kind of showing this effect, but you can imagine that you could add a lot of interesting textures using it. Thanks for watching, and happy making!